Random badassery.
So my opinions on all of these things are based as somebody who uses them or wants to use them or wishes he could use them or figure them out. See, that's one of the things about these jumps in technology. I think we're at a pace right now where the jumps are so big that even people who are interested in these things have trouble keeping up. You know, when I finished watching the WWDC yesterday, which for those of you who don't know what it is, Worldwide Developer Conference, it's the thing that Apple does every year where they announce the new software. And I'm somehow, I don't know how this happened. Like I said, I'm not a developer or anything, but somehow I got on the Apple developer list. I know I paid for it 1 year way back in the beginning just because I wanted the beta version of the software before everybody else got it. And somehow I've made it onto the developer list. I'm not paying for it every year. I don't know if they still do that. But I get invites. Actually, in fact, I get 3 invites to use the beta software every year. I get the developer through the developer program. I get an invite. I get it through the Apple Seed program, which I'm not even sure what that is, to be honest. And then a couple weeks later, I'll get an invite to the public beta. So needless to say, when the event ends, I see all these new features. I want to play with them. I install them on my phone, and then I usually spend a couple months frustrated that I did it because there's always, it's beta software. You spend a couple months frustrated with your device. But I can't help it. I'm super curious about these things. But as I was saying, sometimes it's overwhelming. I watched it, I put it on my phone, and then the first thing I thought was, what was all the stuff that they said it does now? There's so much stuff announced that you honestly, when you get your device, you need a list. Okay, the Photos app does this now. Try this out, try this out, try this out. I mean, honestly, if I was Apple, when I released the software, I would release that. I would release a list of the features. Here's all the new features. Try them all out. Go into the Photos app, do this, do this, do this, notice this. And, maybe only 10, 15% of the people use that. So what? Those are the 10, 15% of the people that really want that and really need it. It would be worth the time to do that because feature overwhelm is a big deal. Like I said, even people who are interested in these things, not only can I not keep track of all the features that are added, but sometimes they just don't click with me. I'm like, oh, like for example, this is not an Apple thing, but Descript, which is what I'm using to record this audio right now. I mentioned last time that they were saying there was something coming and it had to do with AI. I was right. It's AI editing. And they redesigned the app. So before I started recording this, I had to watch a couple videos. And I got to a certain point in the video where I'm like, I don't care. I don't care. There's a certain overwhelm to where you're like, I don't want to have to learn all that stuff. I come in here, I hit record, show me the 2 buttons that clean up my audio. If I discover something else cool, everything else, I don't care. I don't care. Now, I know that those things are put for people who do care about them, but I think at a certain point, unless you're a professional, it just gets to be too much. And it's not that the features that are being added aren't useful. It's not that they're good. It's the rate at which they're dropping or the amount of them. For example, Apple could trickle features out throughout the year, but they get a lot of attention by holding it all back and then dropping it all at once a year, So you get, I don't know, like 80 new features or something like that. And it's just so much. And I think the default response is when something is so much, you just push it away. And after watching yesterday's WWDC, I had a feeling that I've had a few times in the last few years watching these events where I think I chalked it up to, I'm aging. I'm no longer interested in all the new stuff. Just give me a few things I can focus on. Like so many things that they've added to the Messages app over the years, I don't use. Not because they're not useful or not because it's just I don't open myself to them. And I think that's how, when I was growing up, we used to make fun of the older generation because they couldn't figure out how to program a VCR or how to use a microwave. Now, I wonder if what that's going to look like for my generation is what I'm talking about. Oh, just tell me the basic features of the iPhone. Don't teach me all the advanced stuff. I just want to hit record in my podcasting app. I don't want to know all the AI editing. And I think it's not something that people in the industry are blind to, because Apple did touch on this yesterday in a way. So one of the things they mentioned alongside Siri becoming finally intelligent and using AI to make her more intelligent, more conversational, and to be honest, make her more able to understand what the hell you're saying. I think that's really the problem. The problem has never been any of the other thing. It's been you don't get what I'm saying. So one of the things that they mentioned after that is that people can ask Siri how to do things on their phone. And I think that's addressing exactly what I'm talking about, this feature overwhelm thing. It's not only I don't have the time and effort to learn all these things, it's also, oh my God, can I store the information in my head about all the things that this device can do? No, I can't. It's like you ever get into an app and instead of there being like 20 hotkeys, there are like 80. And you're like, I'm never going to remember all those keystrokes. Control P does this, Option P does this, Command P does this. Where's the menu? But I don't think it's just going to be a thing for old people. I do think it's going to be a huge feature for that group of people, people who are already senior citizens or nearing that age that have these devices and don't, they just don't have the time to learn how to do these things, to be able to just ask their phone, hey, I want to do this right now. How do I do that? And just have the phone give you simple directions on how to do that. That's a pretty big deal for that group. But I think it's a big deal for everyone because we can't keep track of all the features. So, being able to ask the phone like, hey, can you do this? Oh, you can? How do I do it? Or in the case as these AIs and LLMs advanced even more, there will be a certain point, and Apple is starting to do this, but it will get to at a very advanced point where you don't have to ask, hey, can it do this? You just say, hey, do this. And you don't have to ask, how do I do this? You just say, do this. Just do it. This picture, I want the top where you can see the light fixture on the ceiling. I want that cropped out of the photo. I want it adjusted so that it doesn't look so blown out and cheap. Make it look nice. Maybe make it look a little cinematic. And then maybe bring up a little bit of the vibrancy in the image. After that, please put it in an email, send it to this person, and add this message. And then you walk away from the computer, and that's done. That's where we're going with this stuff. And it's starting to move to where those things are possible. That's a lot of the things that they showed here. Now, granted, demos are always a lot better than reality. Google has a reputation for showing these amazing demos that either never end up being released or never coming out or just never working that way. And it's not because people at Google aren't amazing and intelligent. It's just the promotional side of things overcomes the realistic applications. And this is not just for Google, this is for everybody. Apple does it too. I've just pointed out that Google, because there's been a couple obvious times in the past, but Apple's certainly done it before. If the technologists were the ones telling them, hey, this is what it can actually do. Don't promise this because it's not that smooth. It's not that good. I think you'd have more realistic demos and more realistic expectations from the people. I think that's part of the frustration we've all had with Siri. Those of us who use iPhones, the problem we've had with Siri for so long is not necessarily that Siri was dumb. It's that Siri was dumb, but you kept telling us She was smart. You kept telling us she could do this, and then we would go to try it, and she couldn't do it. You'd say, oh, you can ask her when this business is open. Then you go do it, and she'd say, here's what I found on the internet. And you're like, that's not what I wanted. I didn't ask you to do a web search. I just wanted the response. That's something that I think you're going to see with these LLMs, these large language models, as they develop. I think they're going to go there's going to be at least a two-way split. And the two-way split is the expansive and the reductive. So when you ask a question right now, if you were to ask any of these models a basic question, more often than not, you're going to get a longer answer than what you want, because they're working on the expansive model. But sooner or later, they're going to start putting this together more and more to where, okay, you're working on research right now, you're writing right now, you're trying to reason out things right now. Let's go into the expansive mode. This is where you want more text, you want more explanation. When I say, give me a timeline of the Civil War, I don't want just 3 dates. I want a pretty extensive summary of the timeline of the Civil War, because that's clearly what I'm asking for. And maybe we'll have to clarify that and say, I'm looking for an expansive timeline of it. But when I'm saying how many quarts are in a liter, all I want is the number. I don't want a sentence. I don't want an explanation of what a quart is. I don't want to know the history of liters. I don't want to know how they relate to each other. I don't want to know if they're from one's from the metric system and one's from the imperial system. Just give me the number, or tell me those two things don't convert to each other, which they do. That's the reductive model. And when we get into things like Siri and all the other voice assistants, which I don't even know the name of, I'm not referring to Claude and ChatGPT. I mean the ones that are built into operating systems. I don't know if Microsoft is still using the name Cortana or not, but Cortana. Google, I think it's just called Google Assistant. And actually, I think Google might be the first one to figure out this expansive versus reductive AI split. Because if you look at the way that they're doing things right now, it's possible. So you have Gemini, which is their LLM, their big model, their ChatGPT. It's their Claude. It's their competitor in that LLM space. But then they also have Google Assistant. And as far as last time I looked, Google Assistant didn't have all of the capabilities of Gemini. And I think maybe it was looking to me like they were developing those separately, to where maybe they understand that when I go into Google Assistant and I ask this question, I want short answers that get to the point. And I think to some degree, it's possible that's what Apple is doing with Siri, because you have Siri and then they're going to have an integration with ChatGPT. Now, the integration with ChatGPT is for cases when it's something out of Siri's wheelhouse. When you ask something that's in your phone, something that can happen locally, something that on-device intelligence can answer. When it's something a little bit bigger than that needs a little bit of compute, it's going to send it up to the cloud. Apple has this cloud computing, so there's this next level where it's still in a secured enclave, so none of your information is being accessed. It's end-to-end encrypted, I believe. But then there is stuff that's beyond that. So, for example, Siri isn't going to have all of the language and knowledge capabilities that ChatGPT does, because ChatGPT has been trained on this massive trove of data that Siri hasn't been, because Siri is private first, right? What we might be looking at there is another split between expansive and reductive. That Siri might be, hey, I need a quick answer to this question. Cool. Siri might be able to tell you how to convert quarts to liters. But if you want to know the history of that relationship and tell me more about the imperial system, that's when it's going to say, do you want me to send this question to ChatGPT? In other words, it's saying, not my job. It's not what I do. And then it's going to send it off to the expansive. Maybe that's always going to stay. It's kind of like Google is the default search engine for the iPhone, and maybe OpenAI is going to be the default expansive AI model on the iPhone. Now, from the sounds of it, you're going to have options. It doesn't have to be just OpenAI, kind of like you have options with default search engine. If you don't want to use, like me, you don't want to use the Google, you want to use DuckDuckGo, you can change that. You want to change it to one of the other two or three. I think Bing's in there too. I'm not sure. Haven't looked in a while. I think ChatGPT, Gemini, Claude, maybe a few others. What's Llama maybe is going to be in there. I don't know. You might be able to have that option to choose that there. But the one option you don't have is Apple only. Apple doesn't have a search engine. So I can't say I don't want to use a third-party search engine because Apple doesn't have one. And I think the expansive AI model might be the same thing, where there may never be an expansive Apple AI. It's always going to be a third-party one, but the local stuff is always going to be Apple only. What is it? I mean, what is it we really want from AI? There's all these expectations we have for it, all these worst case scenarios, best case scenarios we have for AI, but what is it we really want from it? Not what are we going to get, not what are people telling us we're going to get, what is it going to be able to do? I mean, what do we actually want from it? And most people say, I don't know, but that's not true. You do know, because what you want from AI is the same thing you want from all technology. You want technology to do the stuff you don't want to do. You want technology to do the things you hate doing. There's a great quote that's been going around from someone on Twitter. Her name is Joanna Masijuska. I'm sure I butchered her name. I'm sorry. She's an author. Her tweet has been quoted in, I think, a newspaper, and then the photo of that newspaper article has been going around. But here's the quote, and I think it captures this really well. You know what the biggest problem with pushing all things AI is? Wrong direction. I want AI to do my laundry and dishes so that I can do art and writing. Not for AI to do my art and writing so I can do my laundry and dishes. And that nails it. That nails it. You know, technology, what we want from technology is free me up from these things that I hate doing so that I can do the stuff that I love, the stuff that makes me feel vital, the stuff that makes me want to wake up, the stuff that makes me look towards the future. And that's not doing my laundry. That's not editing a podcast. Unless, you know, that happens to be something you love doing. It's not the tedious stuff. So as much as these demos and stuff, they show really cool things, what really is going to resonate is, what does it do that makes my life easier? Look back to email, or go back even further and look back to the idea of the computer itself. And what was the promise of all these things? We're going to make these things that take a long time shorter so that you can have more of what you want in life to yourself. You don't have to wait 3 weeks for a piece of mail to come in. You can get an answer now so you can get that work done. And we had this snowblindness, I guess you could say, to what that meant. We thought, instead of having to wait 3 weeks for me to get a response on that business letter, I'm going to get it in 3 hours. That means I get that 2.5 weeks, or more than that, 3 weeks that it saves me, that 3 weeks minus 3 hours, that saves me becomes my time. I get that back. Guess what? No, you don't. That's not what happened. You know what happened? You finish that? Okay, get on to the next thing. Get on to the next thing. Get on to the next thing. That it just, the tedium and the work and all of the things that we didn't want flooding our lives, they didn't get pushed out, and our life grew and sprouted in the hole that they left. Instead, they flooded back in like a swamp. You know, you dig dirt out of the swamp, it floods, the water floods right into it. That's the same thing that happened. So as much as we look at AI as, oh, you're going to be able to do these cool things, you're going to be able to do them faster, it's not speed that I'm worried about. It's what I'm really worried about is when we can have these machines do these things for us, what is that going to mean? What's the implication of that going to mean? Are we actually finally going to get the time back to ourselves? Are we going to finally get the time to write that novel? We're finally going to get the time to spend more mornings with our children? Are we going to finally get the opportunity to travel around the world? Or is it going to be just the same? More stuff flooded in. More stuff flooded in the hole. I hope it's not that. Part of me says, well, of course it's going to be like that because it's always been like that. That's just the way technology is. But there's one thing about that I think upends that apple cart. And that's the fact that AI may contribute or may completely by itself eradicate work for most people, which is a scary proposition in and of itself. I just finished reading a book. Can't remember the author's name, but it was called Rise of the Robots. Not an uplifting book. Not an uplifting book. But if we were to take the complete optimist view, the complete utopian view, we could say the machines will take this and we'll get the time back because we won't need to work because they'll be doing it. And then we can dedicate our time to our passions. It's an interesting proposition. I think about that, but you know what else I think about is for the last 14, 15 years, I've owned my own business and I haven't worked 40 hours a week. I've been able to get myself into a business where what I do effort-wise is enough to pay all the bills, but it doesn't take as much time. I've learned to use the tools and the things that are available to me in such a way that instead of it taking me a tedious 40 hours, I can do it in less. Because of that, I've had a lot of time to myself, a lot of free time to myself, because I'm not working 8 to 5. The problem with having this time to yourself is you really have to have a purpose for the time that you have to yourself. When you're working 40 hours a week and you get some time to yourself, you don't really face this problem because you have so little time to yourself that all of the things you want to get done or all the things you need to get done are waiting in line. So as I got an hour, well, we better go to the grocery store because this is the hour I have. I got to drive my kids to school. I have 20 minutes here. That's what's going to fill that 20 minutes. Oh, I finally get to sit down and watch TV. Let's spend some time with the family. That's my 2 hours this evening. You don't have to, in a lot of those cases, you don't have to figure out what to do with that time. But at a certain point, you have an abundance of time or enough time that there are not enough things to fill that. I'm not trying to say that spending time with your family and doing laundry are the same thing. One's a tedious task. The other is a thing that theoretically, if you're a happy person, is something you want to do. But I'm saying that there are things that insinuate themselves into places in your life. If you neglect them, there are consequences to them. If you neglect your children, you have a bad relationship with your children. If you neglect your laundry, you stink. So those things dictate time. But when the things that dictate time are less than the time you have available, it can be really easy to do nothing. I go through these bouts where, because I have an autistic brain, where I go through these bouts of executive function disruption. Executive function is the general ability to go about things in your daily life and keep things organized and, line things up and check things off of boxes and stuff like that, answer emails. A second contributing factor to that is also, I don't know if it always coincides, but sometimes it coincides with depression. We assume when we hear depression that depression refers to a state of sadness, a state of strong emotion. Yes, sometimes depression is that. But a lot of times depression is not that. A lot of times depression is vacant, empty, blah. A lot of times it's just this little kind of black hole that you sit in where nothing changes and you go through the same loop every day. You're not feeling sad, but you're not feeling happy. You're just feeling like, what am I doing? And why am I doing anything? Or am I doing anything? Or what purpose do I serve? And who am I? Why am I here? That's depression too. So I go through these bouts where I don't know if the depression and the executive function happen side by side. I don't know if one causes the other. I get depressed and then that disrupts my executive function, or my executive function gets disrupted and then I get depressed about it. But I go through these situations and these phases where I can't function as well as I normally do. When I'm in my normal mode, when I'm normally functioning, I am very productive, almost on the border of workaholic, and extremely curious. I want to know everything. I'm reading and I'm pouring more into my head oftentimes than I can even process. So that's part of the reason that I think the disruptive executive function and the depression go side and side, is when I can't process things for my brain, which is, this never-ending curiosity, this insatiable appetite is part of my defining trait as a person. It's how I see myself. And when I can't do that at the level that I normally do it, I think it depresses me. But I can also see, as I said, the depression bringing on a disruptive function as well. Recently, for example, I went through something that it kind of just it bummed me out. Let's put it that way. So I've been in this void of not knowing what to do with myself. I've been spending so many days for the past week laying on the couch for several hours, listening to true crime podcasts, which I love, but binging them when I don't need to binge them. And then because I'm laying there and I'm listening to the podcast, I don't know what to do with my hands and with my eyes. So I end up playing games on my phone, like balloons, Bloons, balloons. I've been playing that. It's just kind of mindless tower defense, but it gives me something to do while I'm listening. So I have a reason to listen without just staring at the wall. But time goes by and I'm laying on the couch, and then I get to the end of the day, I'm like, where did all that time go? Into just this black hole. Just gone. And that can be what happens when you don't know how to fill your time. It's not always like that. Like I said, some things come where you have to do certain things because there are consequences for not doing them. But when you get into that pit, it's a hard pit to pull yourself out of. Like I said, the idea of the same day repeating. I've done this enough days in a row that my back and my neck have started hurting because I'm not laying, because I'm holding a device up. Even though it's my iPhone, the way the muscles are engaged in my shoulders and my neck and, whatever, maybe I'm pushing my chin forward or whatever, is not conducive to the way your spine's supposed to be for long periods of time. So I have pain, and then my sleep is disruptive. So it becomes this hole that maybe gets a little bit deeper that you have to get yourself out of. And I think about all the positive things that could happen in the optimistic view of the world without work. Oh my God, if I didn't have to worry about how to pay bills, I could spend every day reading and researching things that I'm passionate about and interested about. I could be writing things, I could be posting cool things, and I could just be engaging my creative mind all day. And I could be going on walks with my dog and this beautiful view of it. And that's how it could be. But it also could be months and years of laying on the couch, playing games on my phone, listening to podcasts, and slowly, permanently damaging my spine. Cheery subject, right? But that's the reality. That's something we're going to have to think about as these tools develop, because, as I said before, this is not going to be the same as other technologies where we just get busier. We just do more things. The expectation of your average secretary, you can be a male secretary, right? Just like a nurse. So man or woman, secretary, the average thing that person does on a day-to-day basis is nothing compared to secretaries in the 1950s. Now, what is the stereotypical image of then? These women sitting at a typewriter, typing this, they're typing this for hours. That's what we always see, just them typing. Maybe sometimes we saw them answering a phone, but mostly the image is of a woman at a typewriter. What were they doing? They were typing a letter, maybe a couple letters, but the fact is that was their main activity. But that was nothing like what the person in that field would do now. The person in that field now is going to type more than 3 emails a day. They're going to probably live in email and maybe some other kind of app, like what's it called, Slack or something like that, where they're continually checking messages. This is what Cal Newport refers to the hyperactive hive mind. They're continually plugged in, phone calls and answering this email and then getting a response to this one and dealing with this communication and planning this and moving this in the schedule, and then so much more in the same amount of time, to where if you took the person who does that job now and put them in the position of those women in the 1950s, it would seem like a vacation. You mean you don't expect me to type this letter out in the next 15 minutes? I have like a couple hours to type this, which, by the way, the reason that they had several hours to type it is because they were trying to type correctly so that they didn't have to erase or start over. Because, if you make an uncorrectable error on a typewriter, that means taking the whole page out and redoing the whole page. So it could take all day. And, they're composing this while they're writing it. They're not just copying it. They're taking probably some handwritten notes or whatever. They're trying to put the words together while they're typing it. Sometimes they do it wrong. They got to do another draft, so it could take all day. But your actual output, compared to what the expected output now, is dramatic. And that's what technology up to this point has led to. It's just led to us having to do more. And we haven't got more time yet. So this week, I've been playing around with a bunch of note-taking apps, and I'm really trying to find what we're talking about here for a note-taking app. I'm trying to find the app that allows me to do what I want to do, but makes the things that I hate doing either non-existent or easier. For example, I hate having to organize everything. I kind of want to throw things, and there's an app called Mem, and my experience with Mem, it has not lived up to the promise, but the idea was just throw everything into it and it's going to organize it. Let's imagine that I'm typing a note about journaling right now. And while I'm doing that, in the sidebar, I'm going to see a bunch of notes suggested that are related to the topic of journaling. That's going to be awesome because I can open those and use those to enhance what I'm doing now. And then when I search, it's going to be semantically aware. So in other words, it doesn't look just for the exact word that I'm saying. I'm saying look for the word recommendation. It's not just going to look for the exact letters of recommendation. It's going to understand what recommendation means and look for things that also fit into that. So it might pull up notes with suggestions or books you should read. It might understand that that note is a recommendation note, even though it doesn't say the word recommendation. To be fair to the people at Mem, it does do these things. It just didn't do it. How can I put this? In order to trust just those things, which is all you really get in Mem, you really have to trust those things. You have to trust that when you are writing that note about journaling, that it's really pulling up everything that's relevant. Because let's say in your system you have 10 notes that are relevant to what you're writing right now about journaling, and it only shows you 6 of them. What if one of those 4 that it doesn't show you is the one that you actually need? That's what I mean by you have to trust the system. And the problem with Mem is that because Mem focuses on those 2 things, you have to be almost 100% on delivery with those things. And it's not. And it's probably not their fault. It might just be the limitations of large language models at this current stage, that they just can't. The context window is not big enough for it to see all of your notes if you have a ton of notes. Every time you ask a question, as far as I understand it, I'm not an expert on this, but as far as I understand it, every time you ask a question, like if I'm asking ChatGPT, what was the French Revolution about? The only way it can answer that question is all of the information that it has available to it to pull from. It doesn't know. It's kind of like a human. Like if you don't know how to open this battery operated candle and put in the batteries, then you can't put batteries in because you don't know how to open it. It's not in your knowledge. Now, we happen to be creative creatures in the sense that we can figure things out. Machines, as far as I can tell, can't figure things out. So if they don't have it in their memory, then that's it. End of story. It's a 1 or 0. Either I know it or I don't know it. They seem capable of making certain suppositions, but the suppositions themselves are based on the knowledge they have. Whereas we seem to be able to figure out things that we sometimes have no knowledge about. You can hand a kid a hammer. If they've never, plastic hammer, obviously you don't want to hand them a normal hammer. If they've never seen a hammer before, it's not going to take long before they figure out, I can hit things with this. That's what the human mind can do that, as far as I can tell, that machines can't do. So when you have something like MEM essentially is working from two knowledge bases. It's working from the knowledge base of whatever the AI is trained on. If you were to ask it what year the French Revolution took place, it would probably know that because it's in the training data. That's what we refer to when we talk about training data. What does it already know? And if we were to take that into an example of a human, it would be whatever knowledge you have when you sit down at a desk, right? Whatever knowledge you have when you sit down at that desk, that's what you have. And the same way AI brings knowledge. The data set, or I don't know, I'm probably using the wrong terms here, but the context that you're putting into the context window is like if the human sits at the desk, they bring the knowledge that they have in their brain, but then there is a 5-page PDF. And what's in that 5-page PDF is something that they don't have in their brain. It's something they don't know about. Maybe it's how AI works. So they have this 5-page PDF here. So they have access to the information in this PDF, and then they have access to information in their brain. In the same way an AI has access to its training data, so that would be what's in its brain, then it has access to what you're putting in the context window, which in this case would be the PDF on the desk. The problem with something like MEM might be that the context window is not big enough for your notes. So it can't pull up all 10 instances of the journaling thing because right now it can only remember what it has in its brain already and the 5 pages of that PDF. But if you make that a 50-page PDF or a 500-page PDF, it's not going to be able to pull out all 10 instances of where you've said journal because it can't remember all of those pages to be able to go through them. Hopefully that makes sense. So I think that's part of the problem with these things, and I think that the language model maybe doesn't understand as well either. It doesn't understand what you're writing, especially if you're writing from what I've seen of examples. MEM seems very good at, if you're a business person, it seems very good at professional notes. But if you're more of a creative, it has more problems with that. If you're putting in reviews of albums and you're putting in thoughts about fictional stories and fictional characters you want to create, it might have more of a problem making those semantic connections than it would if you were talking about Project A and Project B. They both relate to the same company. So when you're working on Project A, it says, oh, by the way, here are your notes on Project B. It might be a lot easier at doing that than it is doing what I'm talking about and what I use my notes for. So I could never get MEM to deliver on that promise. And I couldn't rely on those two fundamentals of the system, the semantic search and the similar notes function, in order to trust it. It's not that it didn't work, it just didn't work to the level that I felt like, hey, I don't need folders. Hey, I don't need tags. Hey, I don't need any of these things because I know I'm going to have it when I want it. And that's really what this comes down to. So I've been playing with apps like Heptabase, Capacities, Reflect, Tana, all great apps. The problem is all of them have functions that I love, that do things I want, and all have flaws that disrupt my workflow. Let's say each of them is giving me 80%, but they're all giving me a different 80%. So it's like, like Heptabase is great because I can take this long note and I can break it up into small pieces and I can move it around visually and really understand it on a visual level, which can help me, if I'm taking, like, say I have book notes and I take all my book notes into Heptabase and I can start pulling out each of those points into a different box. And then just knowing what's in those boxes, start grouping them. Okay, these go together because these are about AI. These ones go together because this is about large language models. These ones go together because these are about automation that doesn't have to do with AI. And as I'm grouping things visually, it helps me to understand what I have so that I could then, if I wanted, pull all that back into a document. But now the document is organized differently. Because when you're pulling in book notes, what you're bringing in is chronological. So it's based on the order that the author thought the information should be conveyed. But we're not taking 100% of the book when we do book notes. At most, probably we're taking 10%, which is a lot of book notes. It's really generally a lot less than that, maybe 2%, somewhere in there. So you're taking that 2% or 3% of what was interesting to you and then going, okay, let's make sense of just these pieces. So the chronological order of that book no longer makes sense. So now you have to make a note that makes sense of these pieces. And Heptabase is excellent for that. Capacities, Reflect, Tana, they don't have a mode for that. They don't have a visual canvas. Obsidian does. Although, to be honest, I find the Obsidian one to be a little bit clunky. There's just a lot of clicking and typing that you have to do. Whereas Heptabase, you just move things around and they break apart and come back together. It's smoother. But Heptabase doesn't have folders. It has tags, but the way the tags function currently is more like an afterthought. At a certain point, tags are no longer useful in Heptabase because it's not really designed currently to work with a lot of tags. Now, you compare that to something like Tana or Reflect, where you want to tag everything. Because if you tag in everything, you're creating collections of things. Reflect doesn't have folders, so tags are everything. So you want to tag everything so that when you go, where's all my journals? Hashtag journal. Okay, here's everything I've tagged with journal. Tana's the same way, except you would do a live search. It's just, the way they function is a little bit different, but in that sense, there's no folders. You're tagging everything. Whereas in Heptabase, the tags don't work like that. You can collect things, but it's, the tags aren't even ordered. You move them in manual order. You can group them, but it just becomes more cumbersome in Heptabase. So the organization relies more on the visual. You create visual maps, and then you're supposed to go to the visual maps and find those things. My mind works really well at breaking down information visually. It does not work well at storing information visually. So I don't like the maps for finding things. So in that way, Heptabase becomes a problem for me at a certain point. If it was just the whiteboard part, awesome. In fact, I've been trying to use Apple's Freeform, which is free. It's in the name. Which to some degree does a small, tiny bit of what Heptabase does, but it's just free and it's built in. It's not as smooth either. It's, there's a lot more copying and pasting you have to do. You can't just, I guess maybe give a practical example here. If I have a card in Heptabase that has 3 paragraphs, Heptabase understands that each of those paragraphs is a different piece or a different block. So I can literally grab the second paragraph with the mouse and just pull it out of that box and onto the whiteboard, and it makes it a new object. And then the space between those other two compresses. So now I have a box with 2 paragraphs and a box with 1 paragraph. To do that everywhere else, I have to essentially cut that paragraph out, backspace to clean up that space between those 2 paragraphs, go over, click, create new box or create new card, paste, and now I have it. Much more tedious. So Heptabase is the master at that. And I've tried Cosmic, I've tried Muse, I've tried all of the other ones. As far as breaking down large complex things into smaller pieces and visually arranging them, Heptabase is the king. I love that feature. It's just everything else that doesn't work for me. Reflect, great use of semantic search, great use of similar to this note. I trust it a little bit, actually a lot bit more than MEMS, but still it's not as bad on organization as Heptabase for me, but still not great. I love that it's end-to-end encrypted, and their AI implementation is probably one of the best. It's just the way it's the smoothest and the most thought out that I've seen. But it just, without going into too many details, it's hard for me not to be able to pull blocks somewhere else. So remember I said the 3 paragraphs. Say I want to reference paragraph 2 somewhere else. The only way I could really do that in Reflect is to copy it and paste it and then have it in two places, which it takes a lot of the function of these other apps out, which is where if I can reference block 2 somewhere else, then when I come back to the original source where I have all three, I'll see a little number next to it and it'll tell me, oh, hey, I'm using this block somewhere else. And that might provide some interesting context when I'm looking at that source. Reflect doesn't do that. So that creates a problem in my workflow there. Now, when we talk about Tana and capacities, they are the most similar. I can achieve a lot of the same things in Tana using live searches that I could achieve in capacities using queries. But then there are certain things about each of them that still become cumbersome. One of the problems with Tana is because everything is a bullet, it becomes really hard to do long form writing. And part of this might be a mental block, but it encourages outlining because it's an outliner. Well, sometimes I want to sit down and I just want to write. This is the one thing that I always loved about Obsidian is because everything's a document. It very much encourages just sitting down and writing just a big block of text, almost like day one, just journaling. Tana doesn't. This goes back to the medium as a message. The way the apps function, without meaning to, they dictate the way that you use them and the way that you have friction using them. Capacities, on the other hand, will allow you to do that. And then the individual paragraphs are like individual blocks. They just don't appear that way. So there are some things about capacities that are very appealing. The problem is that neither of them have semantic search yet or have recommending similar things yet. I have a feeling they both will, which is probably I'm using both of those in conjunction. I'm working in one for one day, and then the next day I'm copying those notes into the other one and then working in that one for the day and just trying to see from a functional level which of the two works better for me. The capture for iOS for Tana is unparalleled. It's just great. You can get stuff in there, anything in there, and it's just wonderful. But you can't look at your notes yet. And Capacities just released their new app, and it's great. It's designed and organized so well, and going through your notes and looking at your notes is almost in some ways better than using the desktop app because some of the things are almost a little more convenient. So I don't know where I'm going with either of those two, but I'm kind of leaning towards two of them. I know Capacities is going to add semantic search and the similar objects because they just put out a post of direction they're going, and those are two of the things they mentioned. I have a feeling Tana's going to because I can't see how they wouldn't. Because of where they've gone with AI so far, it just seems like it's obvious that they would do those things. So I guess the real question for me is, will either of the two of them add a feature where I can break apart knowledge visually? And that is an interesting question because then it also brings up the question of what happens if Heptabase makes changes about organization or adds features for organization and adds all of these AI things that the other ones have, and then also has that wonderful whiteboard feature. Because once again, the only reason I fret about these things is because honestly, I just want a smooth production. I want my production line for creativity to just be smooth. I just want to be able to go from beginning to end and have it develop. It's one of the reasons I think tags are very powerful because you can tag the progress of an idea. If something is just like, oh, I have this idea and it's just a scratch note, just a random thing that you would write down on a napkin or something like that. Those are things you want to review later because maybe you could add something to them. Maybe you can clarify it a little bit more and then it becomes more of kind of okay, that's an interesting idea. Then maybe that grows up and becomes a full-blown idea. Maybe it becomes an essay. Maybe it becomes an article. Maybe it becomes a book. But being able to tag allows you to move through that process a lot better. And I'm just trying to find where I can do that. And after watching the Apple thing, I'm wondering if to surprise all of us in the long run, what if Apple Notes ends up becoming that ultimate app? It sounds crazy, but hear me out. It sounds crazy, especially when you think about the early days of Apple Notes, where it was literally just a document that you could type into. There was no formatting really that I remember. It's come a long way, especially when you consider all of these AI features that they just added. And I don't mean just the AI that's going to help you rewrite things and change the tone, basically the Sherlocking of Grammarly. I mean the math notes feature, the superscript, I think it was called, where you're writing with the Apple Pencil, you realize you misspelled a word. You can use spell correct and it'll make it look like you wrote that word spelled correctly. You could erase sentences and it'll move the handwritten words back together to not show the gap. Cleans up your handwriting so it's not as messy. Just huge features. Collapsible sections, which makes long notes more manageable. Still needs a table of contents. But let's go back to what I was saying about Heptabase. Theoretically, you can get most of that Heptabase experience now if you have an iPad. Open the Notes app, the note that you want to break down into smaller pieces on the left-hand side of your iPad. Split screen with freeform on the right. Highlight the first part of text, put your finger on it, drag it across the screen, drop it into the freeform app. Keep doing that with text. Bring them over. Now you have the text on the visual canvas. You can get rid of the Notes app and work in the freeform app and rearrange those. Granted, they're not going to be in boxes. It's just pieces of text, but it's there. It's capable. And to be honest, I haven't tried it yet, but if you have the other apps open, the other note apps I mentioned, instead of Apple Notes, as far as I understand the text capabilities of the iPad, at least what was promised, like I said, I haven't tried this, you should be able to do the same thing. Should be able to pull those into freeform and work on them on the canvas. Still not as good as Heptabase, but it's a lot of the way there, and it might be enough, especially when you take into account all the other features that I just mentioned that are going to be added. But that still doesn't make it the best note-taking app. It does give features that the other ones don't have. All of those handwritten features and the math features, none of the apps that I mentioned have that. So those are huge things. But if Apple adds 2 features, they could at least jump into the pack with these other ones. If they add the semantic search, and if they add a section where it shows notes similar to this one. If they use the AI capabilities to do those 2 things, it's pretty big deal. Now, block referencing and backlinks, those are big features I feel like are pretty important. I doubt they're ever going to add them. But with the semantic search and the similar to this, it goes a long way. And at a certain point, it might be just easier. It might just be the better option for a lot of people. There's always going to be people who want to create complex systems because they enjoy the process of creating those and crafting them and pruning them. They're always going to gravitate towards apps like Tana and apps like Capacities and apps like Heptabase. And that's great. That's what you want. You don't want one app to rule them all. You want a bunch of different apps that, that way everybody hopefully can find that. But the reality is, and I hate to say this, but it's true, all of these apps will be gone eventually. All of these apps will be gone eventually because the idea of the app will be gone eventually. Because at a certain point, the AI will be intelligent enough that you can say, this is what I want, this is how I want it to look, present it to me this way, and it will you'll be able to create, instead of apps for purposes, you'll be able to create apps for moments. Hey, I'm running, but I also want to watch this YouTube video, create an app where I can look at my vital stats on my watch with a small picture-in-picture of this video while I'm running. I know it's a weird example. Nobody watches videos while they're running, but you could be able to say that and then have it just do the coding and boom, there it is. The app thing becomes fluid. And even at a certain point, so many of the apps that we use are either repositories for information or they are user interfaces that are meant to facilitate certain actions. So if you can facilitate those actions without having to actually use an interface, then there's no need for the app. And if the app knowledge is all on the system level, then you don't need that either. So maybe it's just not just a jobless future. It's also an appless future. That's my tech rant. God knows what I'll talk about next week. Who knows? That's why, once again, that's why I called it Random Badassery. So, want to reiterate again, if you want to follow me anywhere, you can find me. It's Read or Die a Slave right now. I say right now because you never know. I could change my names of my accounts. I've been known to do that in the past. But wherever you find me, I'm always open to questions. It just gives me something to talk about in here other than just what's on my mind, which, I mean, is the point of doing this. But if you have questions, I would love to have people part of the process because, it adds something that I can't add. So, thanks again for listening, all 2 of you. Maybe this week it'll be 4.